Today, the 22nd of February, marks the centenary of a bloody event that took place here in the parish of Borrisoleigh during the course of the War of Independence. On this day, 100 years ago, John Stapleton from Course Park Palace was shot and wounded in an incident involving auxiliaries from Templemore in the townland of Rackard. And 4 days later, in Thurles Workhouse Hospital, he succumbed to his wounds and he died. Borrisoleigh was not immune from the violence that had enveloped Ireland in that particular time of 100 years ago. And this stretch of road from Ballyroan to Cairns's Cross was notorious for the holding of ambushes, and as military patrols and lorries from Templemore and Nina made their way along this road to Templemore, they were fired on and ambushed very, very frequently. And if we go through Bureau of Military History statements, we see some well-known people of the time who took part in ambushes here. To name two, Ernie O'Malley and Tim Crowe of Solihead Beg ambush fame. We can see along here the growth, the trees, the wooded area, and back 100 years ago those woods were still there and more besides. And here we see Ross Cottage that would feature in many stories relative to the War of Independence, the Civil War, and indeed times previous to the Civil War. If you want to get an idea of what went on here, it's worthwhile to read a witness statement by a man called Edmund McGrath from Lochmore. Edmund McGrath was a teacher in the National School of Killea, but because of his activities with Sinn Féin and the nationalist movement and the volunteers, he was dismissed from his post. And he was taken prisoner and lodged in Richmond Barracks in Templemore. And frequently, or regularly, he was taken as a hostage on these lorries. And as they went through this area that became in time known as the Valley of Death, he would be ordered out from the lorry and ordered to walk in front of that lorry as it made its way along the road. The escalation of violence that began at Solihead Beg continued with the rescue of Sean Hogan at Knocklong. June of 1919 saw the assassination of District Inspector Michael Hunt in Thurles. September, the ambush and the killing of Sergeant Philip Brady in Lara. As the winter of 1919 approached, Ireland was surely and slowly but certainly descending into chaos and mayhem, and Borrisoleigh was not immune from that. In January of 1920, a group of local volunteers here in Borrisoleigh visited a lodging house in Chapel Street, and there was a man there, purportedly from the County Limerick, who was a veteran of the Boer War, and he was ordered under pain of death to leave Borrisoleigh within 24 hours. Another incident the following April, a tailor, John Young from Upper Street, was arrested and taken prisoner and lodged in Cork prison. The crime he was accused of was possession of a firearm. As it turned out, the firearm in question was a muzzle-loaded pistol. It was actually a useless antique. And the imprisonment of Young had an interesting sideshow in that Mary Canby from Templemore, the White House in Templemore, wrote to the Under Secretary, and sent copies of that letter to both the Freeman's Journal and the Irish Independent, decrying the treatment of Young and the hardship it was on his family. And she also said in that letter that she was all proud to call herself an Irish woman, but if Young was not released immediately, she would never call herself an English woman again. The following, the end of April, the homes of Jack Burns, leader, secretary of the trade union IT and GWU in the parish, shopkeeper Dan Mackey, and Thomas Russell from Summerhill. Their houses were raided by what was described as anti-Sinn Féin clubs, and the three were taken out and badly assaulted. The month of September, 18th of September, an RSE patrol set out from the barracks in Borrisoleigh for the barracks at Gouldens Cross. Four men, Flood and Noonan, Ferris and Marnahan, they were ambushed at Killiskean Castle, and Flood and Noonan were both killed in that engagement. Strangely enough, it did not elicit the usual reprisals that you would associate with such an incident. A lorry passing through Borrisoleigh discharged shots into the houses of the curate, Father Hackett, and into Lucknan's house in Chapel Street. January of 1921, William Carroll, a tailor from Lower Street, his furniture was taken out on the street, and many citizens, as the Black and Tans could gather from Borrisoleigh, were taken out from their houses in order to witness the spectacle of Carroll's furniture being set on fire. Carroll had spent a number of weeks also in military custody, and was also used as a hostage on some of these military patrols travelling between Templemore and Nina. The 30th of January 1921 saw the killing of Black and Tan by the name of George Sweeney at Ross Cottage. A tender of a mixed patrol of military, police and auxiliaries were travelling from Templemore to Templederry. They stopped at Ross Cottage, which was at that stage abandoned, uninhabited, and as they approached the door, the section leader, James Evans, banged on the door with the butt of his rifle. The weapon discharged, and George Sweeney, who was standing 3 yards behind, was shot in the head and died instantly. George Sweeney would represent a sizable group of people of that time. The press reports at the time placed great emphasis on the fact that he was of Irish-born parents, that he had served in the Great War, that he was a Roman Catholic, and it also pointed out that the man had been to confession that same morning. So George Sweeney, so many who joined the Black and Tans were veterans from the trenches and from the First World War, and so many were Irish or of Irish descent, and a sizable proportion were Roman Catholics. Sadly, Ross Cottage would be associated with further tragedies in the course of the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War. And sadly, also, from famine times onwards, Ross Cottage features regularly in the newspaper headlines and the archives, sadly, rarely in a good light. On the 21st of February of 1921, a patrol of RSE from the barracks in Borrisoleigh were fired on in the general district of Racarn. The following day, a tender of auxiliaries from the Abbey in Templemore under the command of District Inspector Edwin Barrows came to that area to investigate what happened. The account we have is what was subsequently given to the Court of Military Inquiry that was held to investigate the incident. And Barrows said that they visited the house of Thomas Ryan Tim at Rackharden. And when they searched the outhouse, they found what Barrows described as an IRA water bottle and a haversack. He questioned the occupants of the houses to their identity, and one man gave his name as John Ryan, but Barrows apparently wasn't happy with this, and he ordered the man to be taken into custody. With that, the story that was given was that Ryan, who subsequently turned out to be John Stapleton, jumped a 3-foot high wall. He was called into a halt, and when he failed to do so, Barrows ordered his men to fire at the fugitive. He testified then that despite spending over an hour searching the area, that they failed to find the suspect. This would seem highly improbable because John Stapleton was wounded severely, but the more plausible explanation would be that the auxiliaries never felt comfortable away from the main road. They did not like to travel cross country, across fields, fearing that there'd be more gunmen in the area and they'd be subjected to further ambushes. John Stapleton apparently jumps over his 3-foot high wall here at Ryan's of Rackharden, makes his way across the road and down by the banks of the River Clodagh, passes by the proper bathing place there called the Sand Trap, and comes to Palace Bridge. Here at Palace House lived his cousin Mary Stapleton and her family. Mary Stapleton, in her coming on pension applications, tells of hearing the firing in the distance, coming out, seeing her cousin coming from the distance. Here he collapses close to the bridge of Palace, and she takes him into her homestead at Palace House. And here we see in Course Park the homestead of John Stapleton. The Court of Military Inquiry consisted of 4 witnesses: Barrows, District Inspector Edwin Barrows, Sergeant James Marshall, his second in command, Dr. Martin Callanan, the doctor who testified as to the extent of the injuries, and Sergeant Michael Donoghue from Borrisaleen. Donoghue testified of he visiting the wounded Stapleton in the Workhouse Hospital in Thurles, and Stapleton admitted to him as to his true identity. The deposition of Dr. Callanan details some horrific wounds that would again pay little regard to the auxiliaries spending any amount of time in the area searching for the wounded man. His wounds were such that the miracle perhaps was that he did survive for 4 days. His cousin Mary Stapleton took him into the house at Palace until she subsequently got him to the Workhouse Hospital in Thurles. John Stapleton had 2 brothers, also in the volunteers, Paddy and Tom. Tom subsequently lived at Kilford Mowan, and Paddy at Coolderry. The cousins also involved in the movement. Thomas Stapleton, a commandant in the IRA, the local IRA, and her brother and his sister Mary Stapleton, an active member coming on. Tom Stapleton returned to America after the Civil War, and died tragically in 1936 in a drowning accident. The death of John Stapleton from Course Park did not conclude the cycle of violence that had now become a feature of Borrisoleigh. More deaths were to follow from there. On the 21st of March, a young boy, a non-combatant, Martin Burke, who actually hailed from Roscoshage, was shot by auxiliaries as he filled his water cart at the bridge in Gardengrana. And here we see a plaque that was erected to the memory of Martin Burke a number of years ago, and a photograph there of the crowd, some of the crowd that assembled there for that day. The month of April, a number of policemen were fired on at the street in Borrisoleigh. Constable Terry and also a soldier, Private Frederick, were wounded, both claiming compensation at 9 sessions the following autumn. The 25th of June saw the controversial killing of Paddy Maher from Moncanaan, close to Glenkeen graveyard, and the month closed the 30th of June with one of the last intense barrack attacks of the War of Independence, with the attack on Borrisoleigh. But these are all stories, bigger stories for another time. But today, on the centenary, that, you know, we remember John Stapleton, who's largely been forgotten, both locally and nationally, in the history of our country.